Mary Lou McDonald, thanks for talking to me and being on the show this week. Lots going on and lots to talk about. Now, you told me this week that the notion that the UK government would seek to rewrite part of the post-Brexit trade deal was, to quote you, shocking and outrageous. But the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, has announced that the UK intends to do this in the coming weeks. And while you may not like it, do you accept that it's a necessary step now to get Stormont up and running again?
No, I don't. I think the decision by the British government to step outside of international law, in fact, worse than that, to legislate to break the law, is an extremely dangerous place to go. I think it demonstrates really bad faith. In fact, I think it amplifies the kind of bad faith that we've seen from Boris Johnson's government since Brexit. And it certainly does nothing, let me repeat, does nothing to assist in the very necessary goal of urgently and immediately establishing an executive and government in the north of Ireland. This is a mixture of gamesmanship within the Tory party, I think, between different political factions, perhaps some with leadership aspirations. It is certainly a game of chicken with the European Commission, with the European institutions, and the north of Ireland finds itself caught in this crossfire, bearing in mind that the north of Ireland did not vote to Brexit. Okay. In fact, people in the north voted against it.
What the government would say is that they're not breaking international law by changing elements rather than scrapping the deal.
But you see, the difficulty is that they are.
Well,
so there isn't a grey area on this. You can't kind of be compliant or not. Okay. The government, the British government, is well aware there is an established channel, a committee, where issues around implementation, where those areas that need to be smoothed out, and let me say, and I said this to Boris Johnson at our meeting, yes, there are areas that need to be smoothed out. There is a meeting of minds on that. That's not in dispute. There is also a mechanism through which that can happen. But nowhere is there provision for any party to the agreement to unilaterally tear even part of the agreement.
But you do accept at least that the UK government does have a right to unilaterally act to safeguard peace and stability in Northern Ireland. That's written into the agreement, isn't it?
But that's not what they're doing. And you do not secure stability, peace, or any level of certainty in Ireland by acting in a unilateral fashion. And it has to be said, and I put this to the British Prime Minister at our meeting, last October, Unionism walked away, the DUP walked away from the North-South arrangements that's part of the Good Friday Agreement. There wasn't one word out of Boris Johnson. He made no statement. He gave no reaction. So I'm sceptical as to the bona fides of this government and their so-called commitment to protecting the peace arrangements. The evidence is to the contrary.
Article 16 in the protocol says, if the application of the protocol leads to serious economic, societal, environmental difficulties, you'll know this, that are liable to persist or diversion of trade, the EU or the UK may unilaterally take appropriate safeguard measures. So from the government's perspective, from the UK government's perspective, they're worried about what they see as grave and serious problems about peace and stability in Northern Ireland, so they feel that they have a right to act unilaterally. You do acknowledge that, don't you? You might not agree with it, but you do acknowledge that they do have that right.
So the Article 16 provision is essentially a review provision which can be unilaterally triggered but needs to be signalled to the other party. Of course, I'm more than familiar with that. Yeah. What Article 16 is not is a permission for any party to the agreement to unilaterally step outside and do their own thing. And let me say this, there's a lot of talk about the protocol and it's not working. There are areas, paper barriers that need to be sorted out. By the way, they're a consequence of Brexit. But let me tell you this, the notion that there is some kind of economic catastrophe in the north of Ireland is simply not true. In fact, if you examine the evidence of how the north of Ireland is faring, you will see that they uniquely have access to the British market, but they also have access to the European market, unencumbered, unhindered, and a market of 500 million people. And let me also tell you, without the protocol and the provisions in it, agriculture and agribusiness in the north, which is a considerable part of the economy, finds itself in very big
Lou McDonald,
difficulties.
It's not working for everyone. I met with a businessman yesterday. He owns a small shop. He owns a great deli, actually, and he is struggling with import costs and paperwork, and the prices are going up. And there are winners and losers in all of this. But isn't the point that all unionists, not just the DUP, are opposed to the protocol? And do you acknowledge that and understand why they feel aggrieved and acknowledge that that is a problem? Whether you agree with it or not, it's a massive problem.
So let me deal with each of those issues in turn. The deli owner, the paperwork, the fact that Brexit has thrown up this blizzard of paper in some instances is problematic. I acknowledge that, as was the issue, for example, around medicines and any question mark over people's ability to access the medicines that were required. The medicines issue got sorted out before Christmas. On the issue of the paper burden, there is a proposal from the European Commission on the table. That's what needs to be examined. That proposal suggests that you could see a reduction of 80 or 85% of that administrative burden. That is the constructive, grown-up, responsible way to deal with this issue. The Unionist position as regards the protocol is kind of ironic in one way, because the very people who argued for the hardest possible Brexit are the people who now lament the consequences of a very hard Brexit, which, let me finish, which is the protocol. And they have a view that they don't wish to see checks, or as they put it, a border in the Irish Sea. But they also argued for Brexit, and they were told consistently that this would cause a problem, and it has. And it now turns out that the problem is theirs.
But it has, and it needs resolving. And if all unionists are opposed to the protocol, you know, regardless of what they thought when they were agreeing to which deal or what deal, that in that context, it can't be unchanged if you're serious about a partnership instalment. Whatever the rights and wrongs of the past, it has to change for the Assembly to get up and running again if all unionists are opposed to it. You acknowledge that?
Well, look, there is no impediment towards the executive getting up and running, except that one party, and it's very important to say this, not all unionists are saying we will not go into the executive. In fact, the Ulster Unionist Party's position is that they stand ready to form an executive with the rest of us. We have one problem party in the DUP. They refuse to countenance a new government despite all of the pressures that people in Ireland and further afield are experiencing. So yes, there have been concerns raised about the protocol. I have outlined to you the channels that exist to address those matters. But it's also important to say this. The DUP does not have a veto on these matters. They have expressed their views. They have expressed their views repeatedly. Their concerns have been heard. Many of their concerns can be addressed. What cannot be facilitated is either a veto by one party that says to society, until we get our way, it's no way. That's not acceptable. And what's also not acceptable is the British government, Boris Johnson, or Liz Truss, or anybody else deciding that they can act unilaterally, act in such bad faith. I mean, that is so debilitating to the kind of good relationships that we need to have.
You've been condemning the DUP for not entering government, but they've done simply what Sinn Fein have done in the past too. I mean, you've been in a position where Sinn Fein have frustrated Stormont being up and running as well. I mean...
Well, the distinction, if I could say, is this. The last time, well, let me outline for your viewers the nature of the grievance at the time was a financial scandal, the likes of which would have taken down any government in any jurisdiction anywhere in the world. Let me also say this. Beyond that scandal, there was an investigation, an inquiry and so on. There was an election. And within a year, we had a deal actually agreed with the DUP, and they walked away from that deal repeatedly. Actually, behaviour that is now repeated in this scenario. We are now here. We are at this point in time. We are living through war in Europe. Who would have thought we would see such a calamity? A cost of living crisis that people haven't seen for 20 or 30 years. We cannot have a situation where society is held to ransom because the DUP won't listen to the democratic voice of the people, and they are aided and abetted in that regard by Boris Johnson.
Okay.
That is a disgraceful, shameful situation.
A couple of more questions from Lou McDonald. I know I'm running out of time, but if the UK government initiates unilateral actions on the protocol, do you think there will be a trade war? Do you fear a trade war?
Well, I fear in the first instance that we are left in a state of limbo in the north of Ireland. The peace process has taken considerable investment by everybody concerned, and I don't think it should be thrown away, disrupted or damaged in such a high-handed, cavalier fashion. There would, I believe, be a response from Europe if it is a thing that the British government insists and moves ahead and moves unilaterally. What that might be, I'm not going to speculate what it might be.
You must have had conversations.
Well, I'm not going to speculate, and I'm not going to add flames to what's already a very difficult situation. But I think Boris Johnson and his government are fully aware that in circumstances where a government steps outside international law, acts in bad faith, of course there will be a response to that. I would urge and I would appeal, even at this stage, for good sense, for common sense, for responsible politics to prevail, competent politics as well, where a government that has an issue, that wishes to see a number of issues addressed, has the competence and the good faith to actually employ the channels that are available. And then let us in Ireland, let people in the north of Ireland get on with it, have government and make the progress that we are entitled to anticipate in our society. I've said all along, we can't be the collateral damage for Britain's Brexit.
Let me put it another way then. It seems to me that what you're saying is that you do fear a trade war. Would you advocate the EU to take retaliatory trade measures?
Well, I haven't said that, and don't put words in my mouth. So what I have said is I think any grown-up person would realise that in circumstances where one party to an agreement acts in absolute bad faith consistently and insists on legislating unilaterally to breach international law, of course you can anticipate that there will be a response to that. How could there not be? You see, the nature of these things is that you decide to work in partnership, you act in good faith. When you sign agreements, you honour them, and you certainly stay within the parameters of the law. I don't think there is anything exceptional in me making these points, and I would have thought, in the mother of all parliaments, as Westminster claims that mantle, that it would be unconscionable for any right-minded Tory, Labour Party member from any political stripe that you would legislate to break the law. That has an implication for Britain way beyond this particular scenario and causes us a huge problem here in Ireland. So I'm appealing for good sense, good politics and good faith to prevail. One
final question. I know I'm out of time, but it was a historic election in which Sinn Fein is now the party with the first minister-elect. The border poll in Northern Ireland can only be called by the British Secretary of State. That's the position of the Good Friday Agreement. When should he or she do that? Now, when more than 50% of the population vote for nationalist parties? Can you give us a clue of how that might unfold?
Well, actually, I have put that question so many times to the Secretary of State and indeed to the Prime Minister and to Theresa May when she was Prime Minister in her time. I think it's actually very important that we set out the parameters of that. We need an indication from the British government as to how they might measure when they would regard it to be appropriate or the time for a border poll to happen. But for me, more urgently, what needs to happen now is we need to begin that preparation for constitutional change that is orderly, that is democratic and that is peaceful. Ireland has changed, Ireland is changing, and this is a moment of huge opportunity for this island. It will be challenging for sure, but what I know is that we can achieve orderly constitutional change, but we will have to plan for it. So there's a huge obligation on the government in Dublin, but also a real requirement now for that kind of rigorous impartiality that the Good Friday Agreement envisages, the good faith that's necessary from the government in London of any stripe to actually act in good faith and to demonstrate goodwill to Ireland as we emerge from a history of colonialism and conflict and all of that, but into a future that can be incredibly bright for us. So that will be a united Ireland, and it will happen in our time. Change is imminent, so we need to prepare now.
You and I are about the same age, I think. So you think it will happen in our lifetimes?
Oh, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. I believe that we will see constitutional change in the course probably of the next decade. Of that, there is no doubt. And we need to prepare for that. And the appetite for change across Ireland is, you know, would really lift your heart. But the opportunity that exists for our country, and we need to bring our Unionist brothers and sisters along that road with us. And I believe it's the job of both governments, Dublin and London, to act scrupulously in good faith to allow the Irish people to form and decide that future together, peacefully, democratically and in an orderly fashion.
A border poll within the next decade?
Oh yes, for sure. Border polls, there will have to be two, north and south. That's what's envisaged. Next year, the Good Friday Agreement will be 25 years old, a quarter of a century of achievement. So the question naturally arises, what next? Michelle O'Neill will be the first nationalist, the first Republican First Minister in the north of Ireland, a state that was particularly constructed and engineered to prevent a Michelle O'Neill ever becoming First Minister. But that's the level of change that's happened in Ireland. And I think that is a source of great optimism and hope and challenge for all of us. But we will get there.
Mary Lou McDonald, thank you so much for
Taking
some time to
My
talk
pleasure.
to me. Thank you.